students. So you want to do some creative writing. There's a fantastic text. It's written by a guy named Shawn Coyne, who wrote a book called Story Grid. And he says there's 5 commandments of creative fiction. And if you follow these, what it does is it gives your story a structure. So this doesn't exactly teach you how to make it like vivid and come to life or how to make your characters believable. But what it does is it gives your story clarity and structure, and so that it builds in a way that is compelling to the reader. So if you've ever seen a TV show or a movie, or you've read a book where like it just feels off, right? You're like, I like the characters, I like what they're doing, I like the idea, but for some reason it didn't quite come together. Like it just kind of meh, right? That might be because of story structure. It might be that they broke one of these rules, that they didn't quite land something that we expect them to land. We, as the audience, we have expectations. We want the story to be a certain way. So what Shawn Coyne did is he works as an editor, and he said, I'm going to give you all of the advice that I would give one of my writers. So, you know, someone gives him a piece of work and says, here's what I'm thinking. And he goes, not quite like that, right? What you need is this, this, and this, right? Or put that in this order, and that's going to make this work, or make this part clearer. So he's able to break this down in 5 steps for you. So the first, thou shalt have an inciting incident. Now, these are guidelines, right? You don't need to follow these every time, and plenty of people do. He calls them commandments because he likes that. It makes it a little more compelling. So the first one, you have to have an inciting incident. What that means is that you've got normal life for your character. Whatever's happening for a little while in the story is just totally normal, right? A person going to the bank, and you know, I've got to meet with somebody because I've got a big business meeting coming up, and it's, you know, I've got my plan and I got to get a loan, and we're going to talk about that. Or like, I'm just some woman working at this cafe, and this is my life, and you know, I'm trying to make rent, and I've got my friends. Whatever it is, your life is normal until something incites a difference. Something is different from how it normally is in your life, right? So I go into the bank and I look up, and there's a guy with a gun. Oh, it's very different, right? Startling. I don't know what to do. Oh my God, everything is different now. The woman in the cafe, right? She's there, she's working. She sees this beautiful guy come in. She's like, oh my God, right? I've never met anybody like this before. I've never seen anybody. Oh, it's so different than what I thought it would be. Okay. So inciting incidents are what's different about your day. It has to be different. If your story is just somebody's regular life, nothing happens, it is not a story. That's just background. Okay. So now there's 2 types of inciting incident. This pushes them out of their normal life, either causally or coincidentally. Causally meaning something causes it, right? Somebody comes in with a gun into the bank, that's causing a big change. Coincidentally, that could be something like, you know, there's a freak car accident, right? Oh my God, nobody meant for this to happen, but now my life is different, my day is different. Coincidentally, right, I run into this person in the cafe. So make a decision when you're writing your story. Do you want this to be something that somebody caused, or do you want it to just be a coincidence? It has to be one of those 2. Second commandment, progressive complications. Your story has to get more complicated, has to get more frustrating, has to get more dangerous, has to get more interesting as it goes. So the progressive complications are escalating degrees of conflict or challenge that the protagonist faces. There's also a turning point in here where the character realizes that they're going to need to make a decision, a big decision. So now, think of it like this. If you're in the bank robbery situation, right, and the guy has a gun, he's like, this is a robbery, and the main character goes, oh my God, this is so crazy. And then the person behind the counter goes, no, I'm going to reach for the alarm. And the guy goes, oh, I will shoot you right now. It's like, oh, this is raised in conflict. And the person goes, oh, okay, they back off. And they say, get the manager out here. And then he says, I'm taking a hostage now, right? It's like, oh my God, this is getting even higher. And then, you know, he fires into the ceiling some warning shots. And everyone's like, ah, right. It gets worse and worse and worse. You can't go backwards. You can't have a scene where things get easier or less interesting or less conflicted as time goes on, right? If the guy comes in and is like, I'm shooting the ceiling and I'm taking hostages and I'm pointing my gun, and then he's like, okay, and now I would like to withdraw some money, please. You'd be like, that's weird. That went backwards, right? You just got nicer. Like, how is that a good story? It needs to get more intense, more conflicted, right? If the woman meets this guy in the cafe, right? It's got to be like, okay, how do I have that first conversation? And then they have the conversation and it gets like flirty. And then she's like, okay, now I'm going to learn a little bit more about you. Oh, interesting. You've got this really interesting background. Okay, cool. Oh, now I've learned you've actually got a girlfriend. Oh, that's more conflict, right? Oh my God, you guys are engaged to be married. That's raised the stakes even more. She decides, you know what, I'm going to back out of it. But then he like puts his hand on her hand. She's like, what? Right? So it like gets more and more and more interesting. Okay. So don't go backwards in the amount of conflict you have in your complications. Now, the complications can take up a good chunk of your story. And what you want to do is just make it clear that it's growing and escalating. The turning point, this is a moment in the complications where your character realizes they have a choice to make. Okay. So here's your third commandment, the crisis. The crisis is the moment where the protagonist is pondering their choice. So something has to happen that gives the protagonist a choice. If the protagonist doesn't have a choice, it is not a story. It is just something that's happening. Okay? It's just an anecdote or background. The protagonist, the main character, has to have a choice. So in the bank robbery scene, the main character has to be like, oh, should I run or should I stay? Or maybe they say, maybe I can reach into my pocket and like carefully call 911 like in my pocket. Like, should I do that or should I not? Maybe the bank robber comes up to the main character and is like, you go and empty out that safe. And the main character has to be like, okay, do I follow? You know, he's got a hostage. Do I do it? Do I not do it? They have to have some agency and some choice. The woman in the cafe, she's got to have a choice, right? Of whether she like tries to go out with this guy or whether she goes, no, you're engaged. She has to figure out, do I give him my number? Do I not? Do I push this? Do I talk to my friend about it, right? She's got to have some choices in what happens next. And now there's two types of choices that any main character can have. There's the best bad choice, or there's the irreconcilable good choice. Best bad choice is you have two bad things to choose from, okay? So if I'm in the bank robbery scene, those are bad choices all around for that main character, right? Either I risk calling 911, which might get me shot, or I empty the safe for this guy and help him get away. Either way, I don't like what I'm doing. An irreconcilable good choice is something where there's two good things that could happen, but you can't have both, okay? So like, do I go with my fiance, who I love, but she's boring? Or do I go with this, really interesting person that I just met in the cafe who's, beautiful and intriguing and mysterious, but I don't even know if we'll like each other that much. I don't know her very well, right? Two good things. You can't have both. So figure out what's the choice for your character in the scene. This is the biggest part of your scene, is giving them a meaningful, clear choice. If the choice is between two things and the choice is obvious, that's a bad story, right? If it's like, well, if the person in the bank robbery is like, well, I could just leave, and the guy's like, yeah, sure, just get out of here. It's like, okay, I'm just going to go then, right? Like, that's not a meaningful choice. It has to be something where the audience is like, ooh, I can see why you would do either one. I can see what the difference would be between these two choices. And then the reader themselves is with the main character, right? They're thinking, what would I do? Okay, that's the key. Commandment 4, the climax. This is their choice. What do they do? So the guy in the bank robbery, he goes, okay, I'm reaching into my pocket, I'm calling 911. The person in the cafe goes, no, I couldn't possibly. You're engaged. I have too much respect for the institution of marriage, even though I'm madly in love with you at first sight, I can't do it, right? That's the choice that the person makes. The choice reveals their character. That's key. You think through, who is this person? What kind of choices would this person make? And then you say, okay, if this person's making a really unusual choice, that shows us a lot about who they are. It reveals their character. Okay. If she decides, oh, I'm going to go for it. I am madly infatuated with this guy in the cafe. I don't care that he's married. You're kind of like, oh, interesting. That is a particular character choice, right? If the guy in the bank reaches into his pocket, but then his hand starts shaking so bad he can't dial the numbers, and he's like, oh God, right? And he starts to cry and he like panics. That tells you a lot about his character. So the choice reveals who they are. And then finally, the fifth commandment is resolution. There needs to be consequence or outcome of the climax, and it becomes the new normal for this protagonist. So for instance, if the guy reaches into his pocket and starts shaking, right, goes, oh God, then this person who's robbing the bank, right, maybe he gets the money and he like kicks the main character over and he runs out, and now the main character's new life is like sticking around to give this report to the police. He's all shaken up. He starts thinking to himself, oh my God, am I a coward? Is that who I am? Right? He has this new normal. His life is different. Okay. In the cafe scene, right? She decides, all right, I'm gonna go for this guy. I'm gonna flirt with him. He gives her his number. She's like, oh wow, now I have this number. Now I have this new love interest. My life is a little bit different. I have a new normal, right? It's complicated, but there is a consequence to the choice that I just made. If your character's choice has no consequence, then it's not really a scene. It's not really a story, right? If it's like the character is like, what do I do? Do I have eggs or bacon? I don't know. I guess I'll eat bacon. You're like, great. So your new normal is it's the same, but with bacon. That's not a story. There needs to be consequence. And the more realistic, the more interesting, the more dramatic, the more impactful that consequence, the better your story is. Now, what Aristotle said is that the best resolutions are ones that are surprising but inevitable. That is really difficult to do. If you've ever seen a movie or you've read a book where you get to the end of it and you go, oh, of course that's what would happen. That makes perfect sense, right? You're like, given what this character did and how they mentioned this at the beginning of the movie, and then this is what happens at the end of it, all comes together, right? But I didn't see it coming. That's the key. That's really, really tough to do. A lot of times people have an ending where you go, yeah, I saw that coming, right? Obviously that's going to happen. So it's not surprising. Or sometimes you have an ending where you're like, I'm totally surprised, but that did not make sense, right? Like they didn't have any of that in there in the beginning of the story, right? This guy came out of nowhere, or that ending was just like crazy ridiculous. So it wasn't inevitable. So what you want to try and do is surprise your reader and have it make total sense, have all the pieces come together at the end, but they don't see it until right at the end. So that's really tough to do. If you can do it, fantastic. Those are the 5 commandments of storytelling. Inciting incident, right? What happens that's different from normal life? Complication, what gets harder, more complicated, more frustrating? Crisis, what's the choice between 2 bad things or 2 good things? Climax, what's the choice that character actually makes? And resolution, what happens because of what's the result and what is their new normal? If you can do those things, then you'll have a solid story. Now, these 5 commandments, they work for an entire story. So you can look at, say, a movie, and a movie has one big inciting incident, a bunch of complications, one big question that they have to answer, and it resolves. Also, each of these pieces exist in a scene. So in a scene in a movie, you'll have an inciting incident for just that scene, small complications that build to a question that the character answers and has a resolution. And then there's another one where it does it again. So it repeats. So you can see that you use each of these 5 commandments in small chunks in a scene and in larger overarching stories. So good luck. I hope it goes well.